Welcome to nohacks.show, a weekly podcast where smart people talk to you about better online experiences. Today, I'm thrilled to have Mei Chin with me. She is the head of product growth and analytics at Zalora, Southeast Asia's leading fashion e-commerce platform. She's also one of the speakers at the upcoming Women in Experimentation online event on June 6th, and today she's here to talk about the art and science of A-B testing and teach you how to avoid the common pitfalls that lead to misleading results. Mei, welcome to the show. A pleasure to have you on.
Hi, Sunny. Thank you so much for having me here.
Of course. So let's talk about your background in product growth, experimentation, analytics. How did you get started with this? Why did you choose this career?
Right. So, to be completely honest, it was not a path that I explicitly chose to venture into. It happened purely by accident through a series of lucky events, I would say. So throughout my entire career, I've worked for a bunch of different tech startups in Singapore and Malaysia across many different industries and across many different sizes as well. I've both been employee number 4 and employee number 3,000, for example. So I've really seen both sides of the growth spectrum. So, why I bring that up is because oftentimes when you work in earlier stage startups with very small teams, for better or for worse, a lot of decisions can be made based on a founder's opinions or how the founder feels in that moment in time, which can be both a good or a bad thing. But when you are a product person who is constantly seeing decisions like that being made in that manner, after a period of time, you do begin to ask yourself, hang on, why are we doing any of this at all? What is the concrete validation or rationale behind some of these decisions? And that's really when I first started thinking along CRO terms without even realizing it, really trying to understand how we can better quantify some of these choices being made and how we can objectively know that this is truly the best choice that would resonate with our users. So, a couple of years of that, almost a decade, is what then culminated in my current role, where I joined Zalora a little over 3 years ago to help them bring this product growth and analytics unit from zero to where we are now.
That's a great answer. And one thing that I've noticed is shared across this experimentation industry. Whenever I ask a person on this podcast, how did you get into this? It's always random. It's always by chance. And I think that's kind of the magical part because the backgrounds are so diverse and that's why the industry keeps moving forward as quickly as it does. Tell me about Zalora. Most of the audience of this podcast is European or US based. So Zalora, of course, for me as well, I didn't know what it was until I got in touch with you. Tell us about that. Tell us about Zalora.
Sure. So, in a sentence, how we like to describe ourselves is the premier fashion and lifestyle e-commerce destination in Southeast Asia. And we do operate a little bit in East Asia as well, in Hong Kong and Taiwan. So you can think of Zalora as your go-to place for anything you need to buy, whether it's, let's say new furniture for your home or new clothes for a special occasion. Although, to be frank, most of our revenue comes from the fashion arm of the company. For some more context, for those of you who are familiar with the tech landscape in Asia, we were previously a rocket internet company as well. So we do have some other, very well-known sister companies in the region, such as Lazada, Foodpanda, and Groupon, once upon a time long ago. We have since parted ways with them, and we now belong to the Global Fashion Group, which is listed on one of the German stock exchanges. And we also, because of this partnership, have the opportunity to work with pretty well-known sister companies now as well, such as the Iconic in Australia. So in a nutshell, we are everything fashion and lifestyle. Whatever you need to buy online, we are there, and also hopefully providing a pretty great user shopping experience to go along with that too.
I'm sure you do. Now, one of the things that you do, I saw this in your background information in the slides for Women in Experimentation, is big bet products within the company. Caught my eye immediately. Tell me about big bet products at Zalora.
Yeah, sure. And, of course, I guess the definition and nature of that might differ from company to company. For us, essentially what it means is all of the moonshots that we as a product department want to take. I'm sure, many of you guys who work in large companies can relate to this quite a bit. Often when you're in a large product team, it can be very easy to get caught in the day-to-day of delivery, where you're just working on features that are purely there to keep the lights on or just, something incremental. You can then often lose sight of the bigger picture and neglect to ship out products that are genuinely exciting and delightful for your users. So that's what our team is specifically oriented around. What this means in practice is every single quarter, we identify a new company metric that is maybe underperforming a little bit and needs some TLC for us to turn this trend around. Based on that metric, we then figure out what are some of the really innovative, big ideas that were never previously considered that would help to really excite and re-engage our users. So, a really recent example of this that I can share is something that we launched just a month ago, actually. It was a feature that we called Zalora and You. And, full disclaimer, it's not the most original idea. It was essentially our version of Spotify Wrapped. So collecting the literal billions of data points that we are accruing from our users and using that to create a unique piece of content for them, telling them what kind of shopper archetype they have, what was the very first product they bought on Zalora, how long they have been with us, etc. So just something that was purely meant to delight our users and hopefully correlate with longer term retention. That is one example of a big bet that we took.
It's a beautiful example. So what is the metric you're tracking for a campaign or a project like this, like Zalora and You?
Mm-hmm. So for a feature like this in particular, it's mostly based on qualitative benefits, such as user delight, right? But honestly, no CEO wants to hear that. We do need to tangibly improve the bottom line at some point. So, aside from all of the usual delight measures that we can collect, such as NPS scores, for example, we also try to attribute some kind of user retention improvement based on the launch of this feature. So what we did was we cohortized the launch. We looked at cohorts of users who were exposed to this feature versus those who were not. And we saw how that correlated in terms of day-on-day retention improvement. And what we saw was a 1.5x improvement. You can always argue whether it's correlation or causation, but what we saw was that this trend only came to fruition upon exposure to this feature. So we were fairly able to confidently say that this feature was also able to bring that quantitative benefit to the company.
1.5 is very high. No matter what you do, it is very, very high. So this is a killer feature for you, is what I hear. Let's talk about women in experimentation now. June 6th, online event, free to register, free to attend. Everyone should. The link will be in the description. So why did you decide you wanted to be a part of this event?
Well, to be completely honest, the CRO community in Singapore, which is where I'm based, seems to be almost non-existent, which I think is a shame. There are a lot of really great thought leaders and experts in the field here, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't always feel like we are coming together in a formalized way, if that makes sense. So, when I saw this event and I saw how global it was, it spans across so many different geographies, people of different backgrounds, I thought that would be a really good way to kind of make my mark in this community as well, which, to be frank, I haven't been the most active in this region for the reason I explained before.
Do you think this will also help the local community? When someone from Singapore is speaking at a global event like Women in Experimentation, do you think the others from the region will also become more active in the community?
I think so. I think something like this would, pay its dividends gradually over time. When you see someone who is operating in the same region as you participating in someone like this, I would hope it would have some kind of a ripple effect over time where you feel that, you know what, you could do it too. And, if more and more people feel that way in the coming weeks, months, and years, it would only do really great things for this region.
Absolutely. And why should the listeners sign up for the event? What is your sales pitch?
My little elevator pitch. Well, first of all, I think it's a really great and quick way to take in many different perspectives within a set period of time. That in itself, I think, is extremely valuable. Even in the experimentation world, I'm sure you would agree, there are tons of different schools of thoughts and different opinions on how experimentation should be run. So just the pure benefit of hearing these different perspectives, I think already has a huge value add. And, hopefully you would also walk away from it learning something new that you are genuinely excited to try out, even as early as tomorrow with your teams.
That's a good elevator pitch. For me, honestly, it is the new voices. It's the people that I've never heard speak or present about experimentation, about CRO. The community is amazing, but just like any other community, there's like 5% of people that are the most vocal and most active, and they're all wonderful. I'm not saying they should not be active and vocal. but there are other people with plenty to say. So this Women in Experimentation Summit, I believe is the full name, organized by convert.com, is a great opportunity to hear some new voices, and hopefully you and the other speakers will remain active after this summit. So your topic is don't let your A/B test lie to you. I think that's the name of the presentation, which is intriguing. It's something that, when you hear it, you want to hear more. So tell me about why A/B testing is crucial for product development and UX enhancement at Zalora.
Right. Yeah. And it definitely was more of a clickbaity title for sure.
It worked.
Something I did deliberately to, get that initial intrigue. But, why I think A/B testing is so important, or rather to take a step back, not just A/B testing, right? Because not every company has the ability to do it, but rather empirical decision making is so important. Because ultimately, no matter how experienced or talented a product leader you are, you still would not be able to predict the future. No one is. And at the end of the day, you just truly do not objectively know if users will respond well to a feature unless you have certain guardrails in place to validate that choice or that decision. And that's why I think it's so important, especially going back to my past experiences of working in very small companies that did not have the capacity for A/B testing. To be honest, I saw a lot of questionable decisions being made and then a lot of post-launch regret happening because of that. And I think a lot of this could be avoided if there was more thought put into validating that decision upfront. And, to really reiterate again, even if you do not have the capability or the sample size that allows for A/B testing, that's not an excuse. Get on the phone with your users, stop random people on the street, ask them what they think. It's definitely not the most robust way, but it's better than just guessing.
Anything is better than just guessing in this, anything you do online, basically, especially e-commerce. You just cannot afford to guess. Whether you're a big brand or a small brand, you just should never be guessing anything. So yes, A/B testing, of course, it's clickbaity because within the experimentation community, we know that there's a lot more, but outside of this bubble, I think when you say A/B test, that's when people start listening and they want to test whatever meaningless thing on their website. But if that's how you get their attention, then that is absolutely fine in my book. There are some fallacies about A/B tests that you will talk about in your presentation. So let's just go through a few of them that I think, without revealing way too much of your presentation, let's talk about the improper user ID management. This is a technical issue that a lot of, I think, websites and apps get wrong. And basically, if you don't keep the user ID in your analytics tool consistent before and after the sign up and registration, what happens? Like, what is the problem with that?
Right. So, this was also a pitfall that we ourselves were doing as a company when I first joined, and I wasn't even aware of it because we had this legacy set up in place. And essentially what we were doing was to declare a different user ID pre and post login. As you said, before login, it would of course be the anonymized user ID, and after login, we would switch over to the identifiable login, usually an email or something like that. And this is such a dangerous thing to do, even though the reason for that is not the most intuitive. But to give you a very practical example as to why this is so dangerous, particularly for e-commerce companies that do not have a guest checkout, for example. So the user, when they have already made up their minds to do that transaction, would be forced to log in upon checkout, right? This would essentially mean there is a different user ID before checkout and after they have decided to initiate checkout. Now, the question then remains, let's say if you have an experiment with a variant that's performing really well, and it did so well that it actually enticed the user into wanting to perform that transaction in the first place. They go all the way to checkout, they log in, a new user ID is declared, and they are rebucketed. What if post that rebucketing, they happen to be grouped into the control this time round? Now, the question then becomes, do you attribute the transaction to the variation or the control? Well, in this scenario, it would actually be attributed on paper to the control, which would lead you to believe that it was the control that was effective that led to this transaction, when it's a totally opposite conclusion you should be making. It was actually the variation that did all of the heavy lifting. But because of this user ID fallacy, you were led completely astray, which goes to show how risky this can be.
So being in that meeting room when you discovered that it was done wrong the whole time. I wish I was there. I just wish I could have seen the reaction of people when you realize that it's all wrong. Everything is a lie. We need to do it all over again. The second technical fallacy I'm going to talk to you about today is something that's my pet peeve, and that is adding scripts to the page that slow it down. So why does loading time, the impact on loading time of the experimentation scripts, how does that take effect on experiment validity?
Sure. So this is, again, not the most intuitive concept for, someone new to experimentation to wrap their heads around. So the way that I usually like to explain it is by dividing its implications into two, which is the behavioral implication and then the technical implication. So starting with the behavioral implication, and this is specifically with client-side experiments, where let's say you have an extremely heavy variation experience, which, it's really hard on your website to load, and there is what we call a flicker effect. Basically means that when the user is first assigned to the variation, because of that delay, they would first see some kind of a blank screen. In worst cases, they might even first see the control experience before the loading is completed, and then it switches over inexplicably to the variation. This can be extremely jarring for a user, where they would see that and it would seem like something went wrong. It might even come across as a bug, for example. Or, in the ultimate worst case scenario, this flicker might cause them to leave immediately and not further engage with the variation. So what this goes to show is that even if you have built an incredible experiment with a very promising variation that was informed by months of user research, because of this flicker effect, you could still be artificially harming your variation performance and once again, leading you to draw the totally wrong conclusion that it was not the right decision to make. And, going to the second part, which was the technical implication, this one can also be a factor with server-side experiments. And one example that I like to use, because it's not really spoken about enough, but let's say you have, once again, a variation experience that has some kind of systemic bug associated with it. And let's say it's a terrible bug that has very far-reaching effects that predominantly affects high engagement users. These would be users who tend to open up more pages or more screens on your platform. And let's say that with every new screen that is opened, the loading time becomes progressively slower and slower. What this could mean is users would then ultimately, first of all, end up leaving your platform once again, which would go back to the behavioral effect that I mentioned before. Or in certain rare cases, it might also cause your API request for bucketing to be delayed in its sending out. And it could mean that users end up leaving your platform before variation assignment is fully done. And this could then lead to what we call a sample size mismatch, where you no longer see equal distribution of users across your control and variation experiences. And we all know this would then fundamentally harm the robustness of your results.
Absolutely. And server-side experiments, do they completely fix this issue or no?
Not necessarily. I've definitely seen certain server-side experiments that have bugs of this nature associated with it. So even when it comes to server-side experiments, we need to be so careful to make sure that these things are not happening.
Absolutely. So those were some of the technical fallacies and pitfalls that you need to avoid when running A/B tests. Whether you're a small or large organization, I think if you're a small organization, you have even less room for error, so you need to be extra careful. Now, there are some others, and this is something that from your slide, I think you'll love talking about this, the using session-based metrics over user-based metrics and how that can completely mess up everything you're trying to learn. So why is this important, and which one should you choose, session-based or user-based?
So I'm actually of the school of thought where it is not justifiable in any scenario to use session-based metrics. And honestly, around a few years ago, this was not even top of mind for me. I didn't even know it was an important consideration until we partnered with a certain technical vendor for one of our services. And they happened to have A/B testing as an add-on feature, although it was not their core use case. So we did use it to launch a few experiments. And long story short, we saw that none of the numbers or results made sense. We looked under the hood to see what was happening, and ultimately we found that they were using session-based metrics. And we were like, okay, so that's why everything looked a little bit strange. So I'm actually a proponent of user-based metrics. I think that that is the only right path forward, in my opinion. And once again, to give an example as to how session-based metrics can be so misleading, let's say you have a user exposed to a particular experiment, and let's say, once again, your variation was very well designed, the user loved it, and because of it, they decided to complete an order in session number 1. The order was completed then. Now, it's also pretty logical to assume that once this user has completed an order, they would oftentimes go back frequently to your platform with zero intention of buying again, but to do other operational things such as checking on their shipping status or their order status, things like that, right? And what this would then do is it would artificially inflate the denominator in your session-based conversion rate. So because of this repeat session behavior, it would lead to a much lower session conversion rate, and again, make you believe that your variation had a much lower conversion rate than it otherwise did. And with a user-based metric, you are only looking at unique sessions per user. So it would not be susceptible to such a fallacy because user-based metrics are independent of anything that happens in prior sessions. And that's why it's a much more robust metric to use.
But I still have a feeling that the analytics world is more session-based than user-based. And I blame Universal Analytics for this because all the defaults were just, you go, you see the session, you see your bounce rate, conversion rate. It was a very shallow way of looking at things. And I think Google has realized that. And with GA4, they're kind of trying to make it more user-based. But why do you think people think about sessions still when they think about web analytics?
I can imagine, first of all, as you said, a lot of bad habits being picked up from
all of them.
Yes, from literally years of being so accustomed to certain platforms that will not be named.
Too late, but
yeah, but to maybe explain my own thought process as well when I used to do it wrongly, right? And I used to believe that session-based metrics were the way to go. My mindset back then is that it's important to be fully exhaustive in every single user behavior that occurs on your product. And, if users are coming back for repeat sessions, wouldn't it be important to get the complete view of everything users are doing once, everything users are doing as they interact on your platform? So that was my thought process. It was more about being more exhaustive and seeing the full scope of user behavior. Because if you think about it, that's such an intuitive way to approach it, right? Wouldn't it be obvious to think that every single user action should be tracked? I would then argue that, the correct way of thinking about it, which is being aware of this mathematical fallacy, is a lot less intuitive. And I think that's why very few people are inclined to want to educate themselves about it, because a lot of people don't really explain it in the most easiest way to comprehend. And that's really why I wanted to include this in my presentation and to hopefully explain it in very simple terms that would immediately be absorbed by the audience.
I think it will be. I've seen the slides, like I said earlier. I think this is going to be an amazing presentation. So if I ask you for a one-sentence summary of what you're going to talk about, what would that be? Another elevator pitch.
One-sentence summary, and hopefully this sounds exciting enough. I would say it would be 4 techniques that you can implement tomorrow to immediately improve the accuracy of your A/B tests.
That's all they need to hear. Trust me.
Yeah.
So with that said, I will just invite everyone to sign up for the event that is happening on June 6th. It's Women in Experimentation by Convert.com. The link will be in the description. It is a free event. It is an online event. There's literally not a single excuse for you to not sign up and attend this event if you're listening to this podcast. And to everyone who wants to connect with you, May, what's the best way to do that?
You can definitely find me on LinkedIn.
That will be in the description as well. Okay, May, thank you. I cannot wait for this session and for this event. And to everyone who was listening to this episode, I'm sure you learned a lot, but you will learn even more on June 6th. And please consider rating, reviewing, and sharing this episode. And I will talk to you next week.